Rafael Montero had achieved a level of wealth and influence most people could only dream of. At just 28, he was already a well-known name in the world of cryptocurrency, celebrated for his visionary investing and sharp instincts in the digital markets. In only a few short years, Rafael had transformed his fortune by investing in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, quickly becoming one of the industry's most talked-about figures. Financial magazines called him a genius, someone who could foresee the future of digital currency and turn it to gold. But despite his success, Rafael felt something missing from his life. He lived alone in a massive mansion perched high on a hill, with breathtaking views stretching over the busy city below, highlighting the distance he had traveled from his humble beginnings. Every corner of the house was filled with the finest luxuries money could buy, walls adorned with exclusive artwork, a collection of high-end sports cars lined up perfectly in his expansive garage, and rare artifacts decorating the halls like trophies of his success. Yet every day followed the same monotonous routine, echoing through the empty, silent rooms of his grand home. Rafael tracked cryptocurrency markets obsessively, made high-risk trades, and attended exclusive networking events alongside other millionaires. His schedule was a constant race against time, with each minute carefully calculated, as though his fortune could buy him more time. But beneath this flawless surface, Rafael wrestled with an uncomfortable emptiness, something he could no longer ignore. "I have everything I ever wanted," he thought, staring at his luxurious ceiling late at night. "Why, then, am I not happy?" He rarely dared to say this out loud, fearing it might crack the image of a young man who had it all. Friends and colleagues admired him, viewing him as the ideal of success. To them, Rafael was a crypto prodigy, a visionary whose decisions seemed almost infallible. One cold, rainy night, after yet another exhausting day filled with intense meetings and market analysis, Rafael decided to take the long drive home, hoping to clear his mind. The rain poured in steady bursts, mirroring his exhaustion, as he pulled into a gas station. As he stepped out, shaking off the water from his coat, something caught his eye: a young woman and a small child, huddled beneath the station's awning, trying to shield themselves from the rain. Their clothing was visibly worn, and their thin jackets did little to keep out the cold. The woman's face showed signs of deep fatigue, yet she held the child in a protective embrace, defying the harshness of their situation. Rafael found himself watching them for a few moments, feeling a strange, inexplicable pull. The quiet strength of the woman, the innocent gaze of the child clutching a worn-out doll, and the way they leaned on each other stirred something within him he couldn't quite name. When he finished refueling, he found himself walking toward them, moved by an instinct he didn't fully understand. "Is everything okay?" he asked, surprised to hear the words leaving his mouth. The woman looked up, clearly startled. "Yes, we're fine, thank you," she replied, her voice carrying a note of forced composure, like someone used to bearing struggles alone. The little girl looked up as well, her wide eyes filled with curiosity that made Rafael pause. For a moment, he felt the weight of his own wealth, of his comfortable life, and the expensive car behind him, a vehicle likely worth more than anything they had ever seen in one place. Normally, he would have walked away by now, convinced that the lives of strangers had nothing to do with his own. But tonight, something felt different. There was something in the woman's resilient expression that made him want to do more than simply walk away. "Listen," he said after a brief pause, almost surprising himself, "I have a place where you can stay, at least for a few nights. It's not much, just my garage, but it's warm and dry. You and your daughter would be safe there." The woman's eyes widened, a mixture of gratitude and hesitation visible on her face. Accepting help from a stranger was never an easy choice, and Rafael could see the inner conflict in her gaze. Finally, as the rain grew heavier and her daughter shivered slightly, she nodded slowly, her expression softening. "Thank you," she murmured, as though the words cost her something. "My name is Mariana, and this is my daughter, Sophia." Rafael nodded, feeling an unexpected sense of peace as he guided them to his car. The ride to his mansion was comfortable and quiet, broken only by the sound of raindrops tapping against the windows. He could feel Mariana's cautious gaze taking in the luxurious interior, while Sophia seemed captivated by the lights and leather seats, occasionally whispering to her mother. When they arrived, Mariana's eyes widened as she took in the sight of the mansion. Even in the dim light, it was clear that this place was a world apart from anything she had ever known. Raphael led them to the garage, which looked more like a guest suite than a storage space, complete with a small kitchenette, a comfortable couch, and a bathroom. Mariana looked around, gratitude evident on her face as she thanked him again. In the days that followed, Mariana and Sophia settled into their temporary shelter. Mariana remained reserved, diligently keeping the garage clean and organized, while Sophia played quietly with her doll or watched the few shows available on the small TV. Raphael found himself checking on them more often than he expected, keeping his interactions brief and formal, reminding himself that this arrangement was temporary, a minor disruption in his meticulously controlled life. But as the days passed, Raphael began to notice the subtle ways that Mariana and Sophia's presence affected his routine. He would catch the echo of Sophia's laughter in the garage, a sound that seemed to soften the sterile silence of his mansion. Occasionally, he'd pass by and see Mariana carefully folding clothes or preparing simple meals, each action marked by a quiet dignity. Their presence offered a comforting stability he hadn't realized was missing from his life of endless calculations and transactions. One afternoon, as he reviewed some investment portfolios in his office, his assistant Clara entered with a stack of documents. Clara had worked with Raphael long enough to notice changes in his behavior, and she raised an eyebrow as she handed him the papers. "Is everything all right, Raphael? I heard there's a woman and child staying in your garage. Are they staying long?" Raphael looked up, surprised by her directness. "I'm not sure," he admitted, signing the documents. "Just until they find somewhere better, I suppose." Clara gave him a small, knowing smile. "It's not like you to get involved like this." "It's generous." Raphael rolled his eyes, letting out a half-hearted laugh. "Generous? It's an empty space in my garage, Clara, not the main house. They hardly bother me." But even as he said the words, Raphael knew there was more to it. He didn't have a logical reason for inviting strangers into his space, for allowing them to stay day after day. And yet, he found himself strangely attached to this unplanned change, this break in the monotony of his carefully orchestrated life. That night, as he ate alone in his grand dining room with a meal prepared by his personal chef, his thoughts drifted back to Mariana and Sophia. He imagined them in the garage, perhaps sharing a simple meal, finding ways to pass the time in the space he'd given them. For the first time in years, Raphael felt a pang of empathy, a reminder of a life that was less certain, less controlled. As days went by, Raphael began stopping by the garage more frequently, sometimes just to drop off groceries or ask if they needed anything. Mariana always greeted him with a calm smile, thanking him without ever asking for more than he offered. Sophia would sometimes run up to him, holding her doll tightly, eager to share a small detail about her day. And with each visit, Raphael felt the walls he'd built around his heart begin to crumble, little by little. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and investment calls, Raphael returned home earlier than usual. As he approached the garage, he noticed the door was slightly open, an unusual detail considering how meticulous Mariana usually was. Curiosity got the best of him, and he pushed open the door, his eyes adjusting to the dim light inside. What he saw left him speechless. Mariana was seated on the floor, surrounded by scattered papers, some of which he recognized as private company documents. She was so focused on one of them that she didn't even notice him enter. Rafael Montero had a life many admired but few understood. He had become the kind of person who attended exclusive events surrounded by millionaires and influencers, yet to him, these gatherings were mere networking opportunities, not moments of enjoyment. Personal connections seemed like a waste of time, distractions he couldn't afford. "People only complicate things," he used to say when old university friends invited him to get-togethers or parties. Over time, the invitations simply stopped coming. "Raphael doesn't have time for anything but work," some of his former classmates would joke, though many spoke with a hint of admiration. After all, he had achieved something few could. Even so, now and then he couldn't help but think back to his life before he became a cryptocurrency magnate. In his youth, he had been a boy who enjoyed simple pleasures, like early morning runs, playing the guitar alone in his room, and even spending hours immersed in the books of Philo Rosa. But these pleasures had been buried beneath the weight of success. His days now began and ended in a ceaseless cycle of meetings, data analysis, and the constant pressure to stay on top. He had become so meticulous and calculating in his business life that he barely recognized the young dreamer he had once been. One night, as he poured himself a glass of wine in his living room, Raphael heard the light laughter of a couple walking by on the street outside his house. He approached the window and saw them walking arm in arm, embracing, enjoying the quiet of the night. A strange feeling of envy washed over him, something he rarely experienced. They seemed so happy with so little, he thought, realizing he couldn't remember the last time he had gone out for a simple walk without thinking about business or investments. Moments like that felt like a luxury he couldn't allow himself, or at least, that's what he told himself. That same night, after finishing a report he needed to review for the next day, he turned off his computer and looked around his office. Trophies, awards, and diplomas from prestigious universities adorned the walls. But at that moment, they all felt insignificant. He picked up his phone and opened his contacts list. The list was endless, full of names of entrepreneurs, executives, and people who owed him favors. But none of those names brought him any feeling of comfort or companionship. I'm surrounded by people, yet I feel lonelier than ever, he thought. Finally, he let himself sink into the sofa, wine glass in hand, as the city slept at his feet. That night, Raphael realized something that disturbed him deeply. Success, as he had defined it all his life, didn't make him happy. And although he didn't know how, he understood that something in his life had to change. He couldn't keep living with that feeling of emptiness. And inside him, a small voice told him that the change wouldn't come from more achievements or money, but from something much deeper, something he had yet to discover. Rafael Montero, always immersed in the frenetic rhythm of his business life, couldn't predict that an apparently ordinary day would bring a profound change. It was a rainy afternoon, and as usual, Raphael was returning home after a meeting. The day had been exhausting, full of important decisions and endless meetings, and all he wanted was to get to his mansion and disconnect from the world for a few hours. On the way, he decided to stop at a gas station to fill up his luxury car. Raindrops fell softly on the windshield, and the sound of the water brought him a rare moment of calm. As he got out of the car, adjusting his jacket, he walked toward the fuel pump, not paying much attention to his surroundings. But then, something caught his eye. A few feet away, near the station's entrance, he saw a young woman with a little girl. They were sitting on the ground under the overhang, trying to shelter themselves from the rain. The woman, her face marked with fatigue, held the girl close, who was silently playing with an old worn rag doll. Raphael found himself watching the scene, feeling a mix of compassion and curiosity he rarely experienced. The girl, with her innocent gaze focused on the doll, seemed oblivious to the difficulties, while her mother's protective embrace seemed to defy the cold and rain surrounding them. That moment, so simple yet so deeply meaningful, stirred something in Raphael, as if he were seeing a reflection of something he had lost along the way. He hesitated for a moment, looking from his luxury car behind him to the woman and child, wrapped in a silent struggle to keep going amid their challenges. Normally, he would have just looked away and moved on, convinced that the lives of strangers had nothing to do with his own. But that night, he felt an unexpected need to do something different. Almost without realizing it, he walked over to them. The woman looked up, surprised and somewhat cautious, as she saw the well-dressed man approach. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice gentle, as if afraid of breaking the fragile bubble of calm around them. The woman blinked, clearly surprised by his approach. "Yes, we're fine, thank you," she replied, her voice trying to sound strong, like someone used to facing hardships alone. Raphael looked at the little girl, who watched him with curious eyes, holding her doll as if it were the most precious thing in the world. He felt a pang of discomfort, as if his own life filled with luxury and excess was a stark contrast to their simplicity and vulnerability. And in that instant, something broke inside him. "Listen," he began, surprising himself with his own words. "I have a place where you can stay, at least for a few nights. It's not much, just a garage, but it's warm and safe. You'll be all right there." The woman looked at him with a mix of relief and hesitation. The unexpected offer from a stranger wasn't easy to accept, but as the rain intensified and her daughter shivered beside her, she finally gave in. "Thank you," she whispered, as though the words cost her something. "My name is Mariana, and this is my daughter, Sophia." As he guided them to the car, Raphael felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a quiet peace, as though he'd made the right choice. The drive to his mansion was quiet, filled only by the sound of raindrops on the windows and the subtle, cautious glances between Mariana and Sophia, both fascinated yet cautious about their unfamiliar surroundings. When they arrived, Mariana's eyes widened at the sight of the mansion. Even in the darkness, it was obvious that this place was of a luxury she had never seen up close. Raphael led them to the garage, which looked more like a guest suite than a storage space, complete with everything they'd need to be comfortable. In the days that followed, he found himself observing them from a distance, intrigued by how this mother and daughter seemed to bring a new energy into his routine. Somehow, their presence began to fill the emptiness he had felt for so long. Little by little, he started to realize that this might be the beginning of a profound change, something money couldn't buy. But Raphael had no idea that the simple decision to offer shelter to two strangers would spark a transformation that would change his life forever. Both were visibly dressed in worn clothing, and although they hadn't asked for help, their situation was clear. They had nowhere else to go. Raphael felt an odd sense of restlessness as he watched them. He wasn't the type to take notice of people around him, especially strangers, but something in this scene moved him. Maybe it was the way the woman, despite her visible fatigue, kept a serene expression, as though she was used to enduring hardships without complaint. Or perhaps it was the child, whose innocence contrasted so strongly with the harshness of her situation. As he filled his tank, Raphael couldn't stop glancing over at the woman and her daughter. His mind, always calculating, told him to continue with his life, that this wasn't his problem. But another part of him, one he rarely listened to, urged him to do something. What happened to them, he wondered. Finally, after finishing at the pump, he walked over to them. The woman looked at him cautiously, probably expecting him to ask them to leave. "Is everything all right?" Raphael asked, trying to make his voice as gentle as possible. The woman held his gaze for a moment before responding with a faint, forced smile. "We're fine, thank you," she said softly, although it was obvious they were not. The little girl, who had been distracted with her doll until then, looked up at Raphael with curious eyes. Raphael stayed quiet for a moment, unsure of what to do. It wasn't common for him to get involved in other people's problems, much less situations like this. Still, something within him urged him not to walk away. "I have a big house," he began to say, almost without thinking. "If you want, you can stay in my garage for a few days, until you find somewhere better." The woman looked at him, surprised, as though she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. "We don't want to intrude, sir. We're fine here, really." Raphael shook his head. "It wouldn't be an intrusion. It's a spacious, comfortable place. At least you'll be safe from the rain and cold." The doubt in the woman's eyes was clear. She didn't know Raphael, and although the offer seemed generous, accepting help from a stranger was never an easy choice. But the fatigue on her face and the cold that was beginning to intensify made her reconsider. She looked at her daughter, who was now paying closer attention to the conversation, and finally managed a small smile. "Thank you," the woman said. "My name is Mariana, and this is my daughter, Sophia." Raphael nodded in response and introduced himself briefly before leading them to his car. The drive to the house was mostly silent. Mariana kept her gaze fixed on the window, while Sophia was captivated by the luxurious interior of the car. When they arrived at the mansion, Mariana couldn't help but widen her eyes in awe. The house was enormous, with an impressive facade and a perfectly maintained garden. It looked like the kind of place you only saw in movies or magazines. "You can stay in the back, in the garage," Raphael explained as he guided them to the entrance. "It has everything you need, a sofa, a small kitchen, and a bathroom. It's not much, but it's better than being on the street." Mariana looked around the garage, surprised by the space. It looked more like a luxury loft than a simple garage. "This is more than we could have imagined." "Thank you, Raphael." "I don't know how I can thank you for this." Raphael merely nodded, avoiding any emotional conversation. "There's no need to thank me. Just make sure you're comfortable." The first few days in the house were quiet. Mariana kept the garage spotless, and Sophia played happily, without causing any trouble. Raphael didn't interact much with them, but he felt a sense of peace knowing he had done something positive. However, he had no idea that this simple act of generosity would trigger a series of events that would change his life forever. The days following Mariana and Sophia's arrival in Raphael's mansion became a blend of silence and routine. From the moment Raphael offered them shelter, life in his house didn't seem to change much. Mariana was discreet, always busy making sure that the place they were staying was clean and organized. Little Sophia, on the other hand, was curious and playful, though always respectful of Raphael's belongings. Still, little by little, Raphael began to realize that their presence brought a warmth he had forgotten could exist in his life. Sometimes, Raphael saw Sophia running around the luxury cars he kept in the garage, her laughter filling the space, always under her mother's watchful eye. One afternoon, while Raphael was working in his office, his assistant Clara came in with a stack of documents for him to sign. "The woman and little girl staying in the garage. Are they going to stay for a long time?" Clara asked in her usual professional tone as she handed him the folders. Raphael looked up, surprised by the question. "I don't know," he replied as he signed the papers. "Just until they find something better." Clara, who had worked with Raphael for years, knew he wasn't the type to get involved in other people's problems. But this time, she couldn't contain her curiosity. "It's a very generous gesture, Raphael." "Generous?" Raphael repeated with a sarcastic smile, putting down his pen. "It's just an empty space in my garage. I'm not giving them the mansion." His tone was cold, almost indifferent, but deep down, he knew Clara was right. He didn't quite understand why he had offered his home to these two strangers. It wasn't something he usually did. In the first few nights, Raphael had felt a strange discomfort knowing that there were two unknown people on his property. It wasn't exactly fear or distrust, but rather a feeling of intrusion into his carefully planned routine. However, Mariana and Sophia hadn't caused any trouble. They stayed in the designated area, and Mariana did everything possible not to be a burden. On several occasions, Raphael had seen her from the window on the second floor, cleaning and organizing the space. Sometimes he would see Mariana and Sophia sharing a small meal together, always in silence, always respectful of their surroundings. One afternoon, while Raphael was preparing for an important meeting, he went down to the garage to check on one of his cars. When he opened the door, he found Sophia playing with her rag doll next to one of the vehicles. When the girl saw him, she stopped and looked at him with her big, curious eyes. "Is this your car?" Sophia asked, pointing to the sports car Raphael often drove. Raphael was surprised by the girl's boldness. "Yes, it's one of mine," he replied, taking the keys out of his pocket. Sophia watched him for a few seconds before speaking again. "It's very pretty. My mom likes nice cars too, but she says they're very expensive." Raphael smiled slightly. "Your mom's right. They are very expensive." The girl's innocent comment made him stop and think for a moment. To him, those cars were nothing more than tools, expensive toys he used to get around or to impress at social events. But to Sophia, they represented something much bigger, a world of luxury and possibilities she could hardly imagine. Before Raphael could say anything more, Mariana appeared at the garage door. "Sophia, come here," she called gently, though her tone made it clear she didn't want her daughter to bother Raphael. "Sorry," Mariana said, addressing Raphael with a mix of nervousness and embarrassment. "I didn't mean to bother you." "It's nothing," Raphael replied, brushing it off. He realized that despite the distance he kept, he was becoming increasingly intrigued by this mother and daughter and the evident contrast between their worlds. As he walked back up to the house, the image of Sophia playing next to his luxury cars stayed with him. It was as if, for a brief moment, he'd seen the world through someone else's eyes, through the curiosity and wonder Sophia expressed. Raphael watched as Mariana and Sophia walked away, and he couldn't shake a slight discomfort. For so long, he had been surrounded by people who always wanted something: his money, his influence, or just a favor. But Mariana seemed to want nothing more than a safe place to stay. She had never overstepped any boundaries he'd set. Her humility, her silent gratitude, disarmed him in a way he couldn't explain. That night, as he dined alone in his large dining room, Raphael found himself thinking about Mariana and Sophia. He couldn't imagine what it must be like to live in such uncertainty, never knowing where you'd be the next day or how to face life's difficulties with a daughter to care for. Since achieving success, Raphael had gotten used to having absolute control over every aspect of his life, planning each step meticulously. But Mariana didn't have that luxury. She lived day to day in a precarious situation, yet she maintained dignity and strength to keep moving forward. Raphael wasn't sure how long they'd stay there. From the beginning, he had told himself it would only be a few days, but something told him it wouldn't be so easy to say goodbye to them. Although he didn't want to admit it, the presence of Mariana and Sophia had begun to chip away at the bubble of isolation he had lived in for so long. Maybe, Raphael thought, that small act of generosity was the first thing he'd done in a long time that made him feel truly human. The days passed peacefully in Raphael's mansion, and the presence of Mariana and Sophia in the garage had become an accepted part of his daily routine. Raphael didn't interact with them much, but from time to time, he would hear Sophia's laughter as she played or the soft murmur of conversation between mother and daughter. For the most part, they stayed in their space, discreet and respectful, while Raphael remained focused on his work and commitments. Mariana, in turn, took care of keeping the area clean, grateful to have a roof over her head. She did everything possible not to be a burden, but deep down, she constantly worried about how much longer they could stay there. Despite the calm on the surface, a sense of uncertainty lingered around the situation, and Mariana knew that, eventually, they would have to find a more permanent solution. One afternoon, Raphael returned home earlier than usual. He'd had an exhausting day and decided to take a break before his next meeting. As he entered the house, the familiar silence wrapped around him, but something felt different. As he moved through the room, he heard sounds coming from the garage. It wasn't the usual sound of Sophia playing, but something quieter, almost imperceptible. Curiosity led him to the door connecting the house to the garage. When he opened the door and entered the spacious area, he noticed Mariana sitting on the floor, organizing some papers she'd brought with her. Next to her, Sophia was quietly playing with her doll, but something about the scene made Raphael stop for a moment. Raphael usually didn't pay much attention to Mariana's activities, but at that moment he noticed the care with which she folded and sorted the documents. "Is everything all right here?" Raphael asked, trying to sound casual, though the sight of Mariana going through papers in his garage left him somewhat intrigued. Mariana looked up, startled by Raphael's sudden appearance. "Oh, yes. Sorry if I bothered you. I was just trying to put some things in order." Raphael frowned slightly, though his tone remained neutral. "Are they important papers?" Mariana gave a shy smile, clearly nervous about being observed. "Just some personal things. Things that remind me of what happened, of what I left behind." Raphael nodded, without pressing further. It wasn't like him to pry, and Mariana had always been extremely respectful of his space. Despite this brief interaction, something in Mariana's expression left him deep in thought. Raphael had never felt the need to know more about her life before, but that brief exchange sparked an unexpected curiosity. That night, as he reviewed some reports in his office, his mind kept drifting back to Mariana and Sophia's situation. He couldn't imagine what it was like to live in the garage of a stranger, unsure of what the future held. He knew he had offered his help as a temporary measure, but with each passing day, Raphael realized that this provisional offer was lasting longer than he had expected. "Until when?" he murmured to himself, without having an answer for Mariana. The following days were equally quiet. Mariana continued with her tasks, and Sophia, always cheerful, continued filling the garage with her laughter. Raphael, busy with his work, couldn't help but glance over every time he passed by the garage. He knew that, eventually, he would have to talk to Mariana about her plans, but that conversation seemed more difficult than he had anticipated. One afternoon, while getting ready to leave for a meeting, Raphael found Sophia playing near the entrance of the house. When she saw him, the girl greeted him with a bright smile. "Hi, Raphael," she said cheerfully, holding her doll. "Are you going to work?" Raphael smiled at the girl's innocence. "Yes, I have an important meeting," he replied, adjusting his jacket. Sophia looked at him with curiosity. "Do you have meetings every day?" Raphael nodded. "That's right. Work is important, you know." Sophia frowned, as if processing what he'd just said. "My mom says work is important, but that family is more important. She always tells me that." Sophia's comment took him by surprise. Throughout his life, Raphael had placed work above all else, convinced it was the key to success. But hearing those words from a child made him question, if only for a moment, whether he was living the right way. "Maybe you're right," he muttered to himself before saying goodbye to Sophia and leaving the house. As the days went by, Raphael couldn't stop thinking about Mariana and Sophia. Mariana was no longer the stranger she had been when he met her at that gas station. Now, after weeks of sharing space, her presence had become an unexpected and, in some way, significant part of his daily routine. And although he didn't want to admit it, Raphael began to realize that this small family was changing something inside him, something that all the success in the world hadn't managed to do. He knew that sooner or later, he would have to face reality and talk to Mariana about the future. However, deep down, something told him that what had started as a simple temporary offer could become something much longer lasting, something he hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, after a day full of endless meetings, Raphael decided to return home earlier than usual. Fatigue was setting in, and the constant pressure of work had exhausted him. As he entered his house, he felt an unexpected relief at the thought that, for a moment, he could escape the rush and return to a place that, surprisingly, was beginning to feel a bit more like home. When Raphael entered his mansion, everything seemed to be in perfect order, as always. But as he approached the garage, he noticed something unusual. The door was slightly ajar, which was strange, considering how meticulous Mariana usually was with everything. He took a deep breath, slightly unsettled. He had always trusted that Mariana and Sophia would respect the space he'd offered them, but something about this scene made him doubt it. He walked slowly to the door and gently pushed it open. What he saw left him speechless. Mariana was sitting on the floor, surrounded by scattered papers. They weren't just ordinary sheets. They were documents from Raphael's company, containing confidential information. Mariana, completely engrossed in what she was reading, hadn't noticed his presence. "What are you doing?" Raphael asked, his voice firm, loud enough to make Mariana jump in surprise. The papers she was holding fell to the floor as she looked at him with a mixture of fear and shame. "I'm sorry, it's not what it seems," she murmured, clearly nervous. Raphael took a few steps forward, his eyes fixed on the scattered documents. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. "You're going through my papers? These are private reports, Mariana. What on earth were you looking for?" Mariana quickly stood up, her hands trembling. "I wasn't looking for anything, I swear. I just wanted to understand something," she said, though her voice sounded uncertain, as if she herself didn't know how to explain what she was doing. Raphael's heart was pounding, and a mix of distrust and anger began to take hold of him. "Understand what? I gave you a place to stay because I thought you needed help, and now I find you snooping through my things. Is this what you do? Take advantage of people who offer you a hand?" Mariana shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "It's not that, please, Raphael. Listen to me. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I just needed to confirm something very important." Raphael crossed his arms, visibly upset. "Confirm what? If there's something you want to tell me, say it now. Otherwise, I don't see any reason for you to stay here a minute longer." Mariana swallowed hard, realizing the time had come to tell the truth. She had no other choice. "Raphael, I'm not who you think I am. There's something I haven't told you." Raphael looked at her coldly. "What?" "I'm tired of all these evasions." Mariana took a deep breath, trying to gather courage. "Raphael, I think we're family. I believe I'm your sister." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Raphael stared at her incredulously, as if he had just heard something absurd. "What? That doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about?" Mariana lowered her gaze, visibly embarrassed. "My mother confessed it to me before she died. She told me that my father was the same as yours. I never knew him, and she never told me anything until that moment. But when I heard about you, I knew I had to find you. I didn't come here to hurt you. I just wanted to know if it was true, if we really are siblings." Raphael felt as if the ground were shaking beneath his feet. "My father? That can't be true," he murmured, still stunned by what he had just heard. Mariana's voice trembled as well. "I know, it sounds unbelievable. I didn't believe it at first either, but everything matches up. I was trying to find evidence, to understand if everything my mother told me was true. That's what I was doing here, going through your documents. Not because I wanted to take advantage of you, but because I needed to know the truth." Raphael's head was spinning. In his entire life, he had never heard anything so shocking. The idea that he might have a sister, and that this sister was Mariana, the woman who had been living in his garage, was something he couldn't process at that moment. "This is too much. I don't know if I believe you, Mariana," he finally said, his voice filled with doubt. Mariana took a step toward him, her eyes shining with desperation. "I'm not asking you to believe me right now. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that what I'm saying is true. I know you don't know me, but everything I've said is real." Raphael didn't respond immediately. His mind was trapped in a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. "I need time to process this," he finally said, taking a step back. Mariana nodded, realizing she had placed him in an extremely difficult situation. "I understand. Just, please, don't make me leave yet. Give me a chance to prove what I'm saying." Raphael stared at her, still struggling to comprehend what he had just heard. "I don't know, Mariana. I don't know what to think. But, for now, you won't leave until we know what's really going on." With those words, Raphael left the garage, leaving Mariana surrounded by scattered documents, her heart pounding wildly. The truth was beginning to surface, but the consequences of that revelation were only starting to unfold. The impact of Mariana's words echoed in Raphael's mind like an unrelenting sound. "I'm your sister," she had said, with a sincerity that left him paralyzed. The revelation hit him like a lightning bolt, leaving him with a mix of confusion, disbelief, and a growing sense of betrayal. His whole life had been carefully planned, every detail calculated, every step taken with precision. But now, something completely out of his control threatened to shatter his world. That night, Raphael couldn't sleep. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, mentally replaying every conversation, every interaction he had had with Mariana since he had found her. How did I not see it? He wondered, his heart racing. Mariana's story was shocking, and although a part of him wanted to believe it was all a lie, another, deeper and quieter part, whispered that maybe she was telling the truth. The next morning, Raphael awoke with a firm determination to find answers. He couldn't simply ignore what Mariana had confessed to him, but he also wasn't ready to accept it all without proof. He picked up his phone and called his trusted lawyer, a man he had known for years and whom he knew he could rely on. "Carlos, I need you to help me with something very delicate," Raphael said in a serious tone when his lawyer answered. "Of course, Raphael. Tell me what it's about," replied Carlos, always professional and direct. "I want to investigate my father's past. There's something I need to know, something about his life that he never told me. I need proof, documents." Carlos listened attentively, but hesitated before replying. "Raphael, you're asking me to investigate something very personal. Are you sure you want to open this door?" Raphael paused. Doubt weighed heavily on his chest, but he knew he had to get to the truth. "Yes, Carlos. This is something I need to know." In the days that followed, Raphael kept his distance from Mariana and Sofia while waiting for news from his lawyer. Mariana's revelation continued to haunt him, and he was torn between disbelief and curiosity. He still didn't know what to think, but he needed clarity. He spent many nights mentally replaying conversations with Mariana, searching for small details he might have missed. Finally, Carlos called him to his office. "I have some answers for you, Raphael," he said, with a serious look. Raphael sat down, tense, his heart racing. "So, is it true?" Carlos nodded. "According to the records I found, your father did have a discreet relationship in the past with Mariana's mother. And although he never officially acknowledged her, all evidence suggests he was indeed her father." The shock of confirmation hit Raphael hard. Mariana was his sister. He felt a mixture of anger and sadness, but also something new, something deeper that he couldn't yet name. The idea of family, something he had always neglected, suddenly took on a new meaning. Back at his mansion, Raphael went down to the garage. When he entered, he saw Mariana, who looked at him anxiously. He approached her and, with a sigh, broke the silence. "I went to my lawyer," he began, his voice firm but gentle. "And it appears you were telling the truth." Mariana swallowed, tears welling in her eyes. "Raphael, I never wanted to deceive you. I just needed to know if it was true." Raphael nodded, feeling the weight of his own words. "And now we know. But that means we're more than strangers. We're family." The tension between them finally lifted, and Raphael, for the first time, opened his arms to embrace her. Mariana accepted the hug, feeling an indescribable sense of relief. When they stepped back, he looked at Sofia, who watched them with a shy smile. "You don't have to worry about where to stay anymore," Raphael said. "This is your home too." Over time, Raphael became more involved in the lives of Mariana and Sofia. The mansion, once cold and lonely, now filled with laughter, conversation, and a new energy he'd never experienced before. He realized that his life, once focused solely on work and success, now had a renewed purpose. The presence of Mariana and Sofia brought him something he had unknowingly been searching for, a sense of belonging. The bond between them grew each day, and Raphael finally understood that the real wealth he'd accumulated wasn't in his money or possessions, but in the connections and love he now shared with his newfound family. And this is how Raphael discovered a new reason to live, one that no amount of money in the world could buy.